In February 2022, the Moldovan town of Bender welcomed thousands of refugees fleeing Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Many of them would have recognized the Ottoman castle at the edge of town and its role in Ukraine's historic struggle against Russia. 300 years earlier, this castle, then under Ottoman management, sheltered one of their national heroes, Ivan Mazepa, and his Swedish allies under Charles XII, after they had come closer than anyone before to breaking the rise of Russia after an explosive war that had brought half of northern Europe to its knees. Their luck and supply lines ran out at the Battle of Poltava in 1709, sending the survivors fleeing south, hotly pursued by the Russian main army, now joined by Tsar Peter himself. When the Allies reached the Ottoman border, they were met by a Turkish delegation that offered them refuge in the name of Sultan Ahmet III, who was no friend of Russia and had been closely following the war's progress. They were welcomed as heroes. After 9 years of deprivation and violence, the starving Swedish soldiers were introduced to the very best of Turkish hospitality. The Ottomans received Charles as a victorious leader and lavished upon him and his army exotic luxuries from all corners of the world. The Swedes were given a generous allowance and housed in a huge castle built by a young Mimar Sinan in the city of Bender, which today features a small museum full of Swedish uniforms and weapons. Mazepa died shortly thereafter and was succeeded by Philip Orlik, another Ukrainian national hero who went on to write Ukraine's first constitution, one of the first in Europe. Here followed a flourishing of Swedish-Ottoman relations. The Sultan bought Swedish prisoners of war from the Russians and sent them to Bender, where a Swedish town, Karlstad, also known as Charlestown or Karlopolis, the modern town of Varnitsa, appeared next to the castle, populated by 4,000 of Charles's followers, which served as the administrative capital of the Swedish Empire for the next 5 years. A pro-Swedish coalition came together at the Ottoman court, aimed at taking the opportunity to push back Russia's southern borders, led by the Sultan's Greek Christian mother and Devlet Giray, Khan of the Crimean Tatars, who was intent on avenging his people's defeat at Azov 14 years earlier. Charles never accepted the Sultan's invitation to relocate to Constantinople, insisting on staying with his men. To ease communication, the Sultan financed the building of a permanent Swedish diplomatic presence in the capital, which would grow into the Isvech Saraya, or Swedish Palace, which today serves as the Swedish consulate on Istiklal Caddesi and is the oldest Swedish consular building in the world. Swedish military engineers traveled across the empire studying Ottoman statecraft and infrastructure, one of them bringing back to Bender the oldest known European drawing of Mecca. They also developed a fascination with Ottoman shipbuilding, drawing sketches of 2 Ottoman frigates, the Yaramaz and the Yildirim, which would later become the basis for 200 years of Swedish battleship designs. The last Yaramaz was decommissioned by the Swedish Navy in 1921, but a local brand of beer named after it is still in production today. Suddenly finding himself with a lot of free time, Charles initiated an overhaul of Sweden's national administration. This included the creation of one of the world's first progressive taxation systems and even plans to beautify Stockholm with Islamic-influenced architecture. Before long, Charles and his entourage became a tourist attraction, with Ottoman nobles making the trip to Karlopolis to see the Swedish settlement and their immortal king for themselves. Charles's abstinence from alcohol and tendency to pray several times a day was a hit with the locals. He also learned Turkish, his 5th language, and fell in love with Turkish food, particularly lahana dolması. He would remember his time in Bender as the happiest of his life. But despite these comforts, Charles had not forgotten his mission and would spend the next 5 years trying to convince the Sultan to march on Russia and finish the war he had started. But Ahmet refused to be pushed into war by Charles or his own generals, while also refusing Peter's demands to surrender Charles, declaring it his duty as a Muslim to prevent further bloodshed. But in 1710, Peter convinced the Ottomans' Wallachian vassals to side with him and personally marched 38,000 Russian troops into Ottoman territory, headed towards the Swedish camp. This prompted a reluctant Ahmet to declare war on Russia and send 200,000 Ottoman soldiers to check the Russian advance at the Danube River. With the Russians flanked by Crimean cavalry, the Ottomans surrounded the Russians at the Battle of Stanilești. After 4 days, the Russians surrendered and Peter himself was taken prisoner. When news of the Ottoman victory reached Bender, Charles rode day and night to witness the final defeat of his arch-enemy for himself. But he arrived too late. The Ottoman general Baltaca Mehmet Pasha had released Peter in return for a bribe and loose assurances that Russia would withdraw from the Black Sea. The importance of this failure was masked by the fact that it was celebrated as a victory at the time. But in the hands of a less timid emperor, the Ottomans could have ended the Russian expansion that would eventually destroy the Ottoman Empire. Already weak from 9 years of war, Russia would have been no match for the third biggest military in the world. Never again would the Ottomans have such a good opportunity to break the power of their northern rival. Back in Bender, the Parsi was turning sour. After 5 years, Charles was earning a reputation as a bad and increasingly expensive guest. He had little understanding of money, putting him at the mercy of local lenders, to whom he now owed the equivalent of Sweden's annual GDP. This was despite his allowance, some of which, it emerged, he was using to bribe Ottoman officials to convince the Sultan of his cause. This earned Charles the nickname by which he is still remembered by Turks today, Demirbaş Charles, or Charles the Ironhead. Back in Europe, this was directly translated and attributed to the king's toughness. However, Demirbaş in Turkish is also a business term meaning fixed cost or overhead, and was a cheeky nickname used in the Ottoman court referring to the increasingly unjustifiable cost of their freeloading Swedish guests. Furthermore, the failure at Stanilești had pushed Charles over the edge. Growing increasingly obsessed, he was convinced that his alliance with the Ottomans was the only way of defeating Peter. When the Sultan offered to pay Charles to leave, he accepted the money, but still refused to go, explaining that it was God's will that he stay. At this point, Devlet Giray, Khan of the Crimean Tatars, took matters into his own hands. Fed up with both the Sultan's indecision and Charles's freeloading, on the 1st of February 1713, he sent his army to storm the Swedish settlement and arrest Charles and his men. Charles ordered his 600 remaining soldiers to prepare for their first battle in 5 years, setting the stage for what Voltaire would call the Swedish Thermopylae. Deploying their newly acquired Turkish vocabulary, Swedes remember it to this day as Kalabaliken I Bender, or the skirmish at Bender. Watch the third and last part of this series to discover the climactic and largely forgotten end of the Great Northern War, known to Turks as the Prut Savaşı.